Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee briefing for Tuesday, October 22nd. We have a full agenda of topics. First, building on the General Assembly's work with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act and the 2022 Climate Solutions Now Act, sponsored by our own Speaker Pro Tem Dana Stein in the House, the governor issued an executive order on June 4th requiring state government to take certain actions regarding Maryland's climate reduction plan. As our participants will tell us, Maryland's been a leader in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is not only beneficial impacting climate change, but also means cleaner air and some exciting economic opportunities. That said, if we're to achieve the interim goal of 60% reduction from 2006 greenhouse gas levels by 2031, we have a long way to go. And in fact, the baseline scenario MDE uses assumes current policies such as California Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Truck, and the Building Energy Performance Standards, all of which have some implementation challenges we'll need to work on together. So the committee looks forward to hearing about these next steps in our climate pollution reduction plan. And for that, we're going to hear from Megan Conklin, the Chief Sustainability Officer for the state of Maryland, Secretary McElwain from the Department of Environment, and her team, Scott Goldman, Chief of Staff at MDE, Rachel Lamb, Senior Climate Advisor at MDE. And then the climate executive order also requires the Maryland Department of Transportation to take certain actions. So I know we have Darren Lovis, Chief Environment and Sustainability for Transportation at the Maryland Department. And I think we're going to be joined by Joe McAndrew, the Assistant Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation as well. After that, we'll stay with the Maryland Department of the Environment to discuss several ongoing issues. The General Assembly and the governor are asking MDE to do a lot across a range of important topics. And it's our job as the Environment and Transportation Committee to stay on top of that progress and also consider how implementation of all these initiatives feeds into further legislative efforts. The topics the department will brief us on include the Building Energy Performance Standards, the statewide recycling needs assessment and producer responsibility advisory council, Advanced Clean Truck, the Paint Stewardship Act, Maryland Commission on Climate Change working groups, the study on well and septic permitting, the work group on mold standards and remediation, and the pollution early detection system for wastewater treatment facilities. Finally, we will turn to the Key Bridge. This committee had the opportunity to visit the Port of Baltimore and the city a few weeks ago and saw the devastation both from land and by boat. About 1 month ago, the Attorney General filed a statement of claims against the owner of the vessel that collided with the Key Bridge on behalf of the state, and we understand the claims to be far-reaching and look forward to receiving an update on them from Attorney General Brown, Deputy Attorney General Quattrocchi, and Deputy Chief of the Civil Division, Robert Scott. So colleagues, we're going to take each of these speakers on each topic as a panel and do questions after that panel. We'll move on to the next topic. If you wish to ask a question, press the raise hand button and I will call on you at the designated time. And remember to mute when you're not speaking and that you are on camera. I know we're a little out of practice from Zoom, so make sure you're not doing anything on camera you don't want seen by your millions of adoring fans. So with that, we can turn to the first panel, which I think will be led off by Chief Sustainability Officer, Megan Conklin.
Good morning, Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee, and happy birthday, I understand, to Delegate Ruth. My name is Megan Conklin, Chief Sustainability Officer in the Office of Governor Moore. It's a pleasure to be here virtually today to discuss the governor's executive order on climate change. On June 4th of this year, Governor Moore signed one of the most comprehensive executive orders on climate change in Maryland's history. It is entitled Leadership by State Government, Implementing Maryland's Climate Pollution Reduction Plan. As this body knows, in 2022, the Maryland General Assembly enacted the Maryland Climate Solutions Now Act, which requires Maryland to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 60% below 2006 levels by 2031 and reach net zero emissions by 2045. In order to meet those goals, in December of 2023, the Maryland Department of the Environment released Maryland's Climate Pollution Reduction Plan, which is our state's roadmap on how we will reach our climate goals. Governor Moore's executive order lays out additional steps our state will take to implement Maryland's climate pollution reduction plan and reach the climate goals mandated by the General Assembly. The executive order is grounded in three main pillars: partnership, action, and equity, all of which I will elaborate upon today. In terms of the first pillar on partnership, the governor is requiring a whole of government approach to climate change. The governor has called on each and every state agency to submit a climate implementation plan by November 1st of this year. By requiring accountability and planning from each state agency, we stand a better chance of delivering results for the people of Maryland quickly and efficiently. Those climate implementation plans, or CIPs, as we are calling them, are currently being developed by Maryland's 25 state agencies. Also on the whole of government approach, the executive order established the governor's subcabinet on climate change. The governor's subcabinet is chaired by my colleague, Secretary Serena McElwain, and vice chaired by myself, and includes about 10 different state agencies in the Maryland Energy Administration. The governor's subcabinet on climate change has already met twice since the issuance of the executive order. The executive order further requires that the climate subcabinet, led by MDE, submit a report to the governor by December 1st, 2024, and annually by December 1st thereafter, detailing the progress of implementing Maryland's climate pollution reduction plan. In terms of the second pillar on action, the executive order directs several of our state agencies to undertake action to implement the recommendations of the climate pollution reduction plan. This includes directing MDE to propose a zero-emission heating equipment standard regulation, a clean heat standard regulation, and to work with RGGI states to establish a new regional cap for carbon dioxide emissions from power plants that are aligned with Maryland and partner states' 100% clean energy goals. The executive order also directs MEA to establish a framework for a clean energy standard to achieve 100% clean energy by 2035, and directs MDOT to undertake several measures on clean transportation. Under this section, the governor has jump-started the process of reducing building emissions by making it easier for families to swap out home heating systems that run on oil and gas with modern, innovative heating systems that run on electricity. Federal home energy rebate programs under the Biden-Harris administration will make it cheaper than ever for families to swap out their old furnace for an electric heat pump. MEA is submitting their application to the Department of Energy for $137 million in home energy rebates this month, and we expect to start making those rebates available to Marylanders starting next year. And an analysis from RMI suggests that Marylanders who upgrade their heating and hot water systems could save $1,050 per year on average. So it's not just good for the planet, it's also good for Maryland's pocketbooks. In terms of the third pillar on equity, as part of the whole of government approach to climate change, Maryland agencies are required to advance environmental justice by working to address the disproportionate impacts of climate change for underserved and overburdened communities, including the application of Justice 40 goals, initiatives, and funding. Before I conclude today, I want to provide some updates to the committee on federal funding, as I am required to provide updates on federal funding as part of the annual progress report required in the executive order. Under the leadership of the Biden-Harris administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the IIJA, comprise the most significant climate investments in American history. The governor's federal investment team, which I sit on, has worked in close coordination with a variety of state agencies to ensure that Maryland is not leaving any federal money on the table. I'm proud to share that as of October 1st, 2024, Maryland has secured nearly $13.5 billion under the IRA and the IIJA. That includes $12.88 billion under the IIJA and $465 million under the IRA. Some recent successes and items that we currently have in progress that I want to highlight today at the end of my remarks include: early this year, Maryland received $62 million from the IRA's Solar for All program, which will help advance solar development in low-income communities in Maryland. A few months ago, Maryland also received $130 million from the IRA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which will help advance electric vehicle charging infrastructure for heavy-duty trucks along the I-95 corridor and enhance climate resilience projects along Maryland's coastal areas. This month, MEA is submitting their application to the Department of Energy for $137 million in home energy rebates. These rebates will be available to Marylanders starting next year and will mainly focus on low and moderate income households to provide rebates to upgrade appliances and perform home energy upgrades to homes in Maryland. Additionally, we have been working with the Department of Budget and Management to ensure that Maryland is taking full advantage of the direct pay provision included in the IRA, which allows our state to receive a payment equal to the full value of tax credits for our qualifying clean energy projects. This is the first year that states have been able to utilize this program, but the systems we are currently putting in place to capture this additional funding will ensure that Maryland can take full advantage of this funding moving forward. This concludes my statement for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's turn it over to the secretary.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. Well, good to see you all virtually and very happy to be here. Thank you, Megan. I want to now turn my attention to just speaking a little bit about what we've been doing to implement the governor's executive order since June. So first, the 11 agencies on the subcabinet that Megan mentioned really do play an important role in implementing the climate pollution reduction plan. And they also play an important role in helping us reach our climate goals. And honestly, and thanks to this new subcabinet, it does allow us to work together so that we can ensure that collectively we're making progress toward our shared climate goals. We've already met twice this year, and we will continue to meet on a quarterly basis. The executive order also directs not just the 11 agencies that are on the subcabinet, but all 25 principal departments. They are all required to develop agency climate plans. Essentially, these plans allow us, all of us, to identify and implement high impact strategic actions to help us meet our climate goals. And I'm particularly happy about this whole of government approach because it does emphasize that tackling climate change, it's not just the responsibility of MDE. It requires all of us, all agencies, to play a role in fighting climate change. All of our plans, and yes, that includes MDE, we have to have a plan as well. All the plans will cover 5 components that you see here, which are due to the governor on November 1st. So now I'd like to just spend a few minutes on explaining those important components. So first, as you heard from Megan, our goals are very aggressive. We all know this. I've said it 1,000 times because they are. They're more aggressive than the national goal. And so, yes, meeting these goals will not be easy. If you look on the left side of the graph, it shows that if we fully implement the current policies that we already have, we can achieve a 51% greenhouse gas reduction by 2031. I want to emphasize that achieving 51% by 2031 is outstanding for any state. But again, that's not enough for us in Maryland. We have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60%. And as you can see on the right side of the graph, we need additional policies across all sectors of the economy in order for us to actually reach those goals. And this is why the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan was so important for Maryland, because it does outline what those additional policies and actions are, what the ones that are actually required for us to really reach the 60% greenhouse gas target. And again, this is why those implementation plans that are required in the EO are so very important. So next up, this slide, it simply shows that a lot of the actions that are required are really actions coming from MDE, MEA, and MDOT. All of us have to implement very important new programs to accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy. Labor and DSCI are also required. They have a part of all of this as well. They're required to expand the workforce development programs so that we can ensure in Maryland that we have a pipeline of electricians, HVAC technicians, and tradespeople all of those people and jobs are needed in order for us to really make this transition. And all of us, all the agencies are asked to ensure that we are not leaving any money behind. And so we're encouraged to apply for all the federal funding that's available, but also find creative solutions to address the challenges that, we're facing today. Agencies are also asked to consider our climate changes as they think about how to use their own programs to impact change in their areas. And they're also asked to look at specific actions that they can take right now within their programs to reduce greenhouse gas and ensure that all of our communities are more climate resilient. It's so important that we look at all of these things as we're doing our everyday business. This slide highlights the importance of protecting our communities because we all know that some of our communities have been left behind far too long and they're disproportionately impacted by climate change. And this is another reason why the Climate Solutions Now Act directed my agency to develop a tool to identify those communities that are disproportionately affected by climate impacts. So as you can see here, the new climate vulnerability mapping tool, it complements the system that we have at MDE, and it's called the Environmental Justice Screening Tool. That tool can be used by all the agencies, and I'm hopeful that they can use this tool to help shape all of their climate initiatives. And for this slide, I want to mention the reporting requirements that are required under the executive order and for the climate subcabinet. We are required to submit an annual report on the progress that we're making based on our new implementation plans. And we're also required to demonstrate how that progress relates to the strategies that are outlined in the climate reduction, pollution reduction plan. But the good news is this reporting requirement, it's not a heavy lift on us because we're already reporting on a lot of this information in so many other reports. So for example, MDE, we already publish the greenhouse gas inventory every 3 years as required under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. So we're already measuring progress against our greenhouse gas reduction targets. We are also already required to submit a progress report on our implementation efforts as required under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act of 2016. So the only difference is instead of producing that report every 5 years, we will start doing it every year as per the EO. So the bottom line is agencies can just use the existing reports that we already have to communicate progress on their agency's climate implementation plans. And this slide, before I turn things over to my colleagues in Maryland's Department of Transportation, I did want to talk just briefly about the 2 new regulations that the governor directed us to implement in the executive order. One is the Clean Heat Standard, and the other is the Zero Emission Heating Equipment Standard. These 2 standards essentially are designed to help Marylanders save money on their heating costs by switching to clean and efficient heat appliances. The average Maryland household is going to save at least $1,000 a year on their energy costs. We plan to continue to engage with all the stakeholders. We've been doing that recently, and we plan to continue to do that because we want to make sure that we have input from everyone so that we can design the program based on all the feedback that we're getting. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chair. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I think we'll hear from the Department of Transportation before we get to some questions. I do see we have some already. We'll turn to Assistant Secretary McAndrew.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate you and the committee for having us here today, and thank you to our partners at MDE and Secretary McElwain for the leadership and support, as well as Ms. Conklin. I'm joined here today by my colleague Darren Lovas, our Chief of Environment and Sustainable Transportation. He is actually calling us from the great state of Minnesota, where he's been invited to be an expert with the Federal Highway Administration on a state DOT peer exchange titled Advancing the Advanced. FHWA has acknowledged that MDOT is one of the top 10 states in the country advancing climate pollution reduction strategies, and Darren is there to partner with his colleagues to learn and ultimately bring back good lessons for us to continue to advance our work. But I just wanted to acknowledge him, but also the good work that the collective team at MDOT is doing, really through the support and partnership and collaboration that we have here today. If we can go to the next slide. Perfect. I'm here to just give you a quick overview of the executive order and the requirements on MDOT. These are five requirements. We need to revise our zero emission vehicle infrastructure plan. We need to evaluate and reduce greenhouse gases within our consolidated transportation program. We need to ultimately invest in programs that reduce vehicle miles traveled and increase transportation choices. We need to establish annual greenhouse gases and VMT reduction targets. And we ultimately need to move to implement the carbon reduction strategy. I'll get into all five of these. I think we're making good strides on all five, which is the good news. But I think we needed this years ago. As you all know, transportation is one of the leading sources of greenhouse gases in the state of Maryland and throughout the country as a sector. And so we need to be doing our part. And under Governor Moore's leadership and Secretary Wiedefeld's efforts, we are working across our big department to do what we can to achieve the goals. So next slide. First, we need to revise our ZVIP. And principally, we need to bring in our national electric vehicle infrastructure program investments. It's a new program. It's a formula program allocated through the Federal Highway Administration to SHA directly to build out DC fast charging networks along 23 designated corridors, principal highway network in the state, and then ultimately move into community charging once we get through with the alternative fuel corridors. NEVI is kind of the marquee program that we've got going at the department. When we came into office in 2023, the state had not moved terribly far to ultimately put those dollars on the street, even though we were, I believe, in the third year of the bipartisan infrastructure laws implementation period. Under Administrator Pine's leadership and Darren's leadership and the Secretary's leadership, they were able to move from October to January in record speed to get a procurement out the door. And in July of last year, we ultimately provided conditional awards to a number of corridors and partners. And we plan to have all of those under agreement, I believe, starting next month, with some of those chargers coming online as early as Q2 calendar year of next year. What's important to note is that EV charging and transition for light duty vehicles is happening at pace, but the ZVIP will also expand beyond it by outlining a comprehensive MDOT-led multi-agency strategy for charging infrastructure for all of our fleet, including the medium and heavy duty. This plans to accommodate the projected growth of the light, medium, and heavy duty zero emission vehicles due to the CSNA, ACC2 and ACT. The development of the ZVIP will involve the Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council, that some of our colleagues here from the General Assembly may be members of. It ultimately includes many state agencies, and the group will inform that product as we go. But what's important to note is that the ZVIP update is underway as we speak, and we're moving to have it ready for public consumption next year. Next slide. Next, we need to be reducing greenhouse gases that are directly attributable to the investments that MDOT makes. Our capital program invests, as the draft CTP recently was released, roughly $19 billion across our department and across the state. We need to be looking to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions directly attributable to our investments. We are doing that with on two fronts, I think. First, we're looking at, as the direction of the Train Commission pointed us, as well as achieving the governor's data-led and heart-strong call, looking to develop a prioritization program with which we can go ahead and evaluate on a qualitative basis the ability of our investments to achieve the values of the state that we hold dear, whether it be reducing roadway fatalities, better connecting residents to opportunities by more modes of transportation, with a special emphasis on equity emphasis areas, or making sure that each one of our dollars is being measured on how it relates to greenhouse gas emission reductions. That is the prioritization program that we are developing as we speak. We plan to assess each one of our dollars that is expanding our network against our ability to reduce greenhouse gases. We've also been working in the interim with Delegate Edelson in a work group to support his efforts to assess the climate impacts of our investments through the bill that he put forward last year, the TCA bill, and we're having good, strong conversations. We're optimistic that will land at a path that we can all implement and see fruitful benefit from. But in general, we are advancing this effort at pace, and we're excited to work with you to be able to do that. Next slide. The next call for action in the EO is to reduce VMT and increase transportation choices. I think that this is important to note. We need to be doing that with our investments. What you can see on the top line there, the first bullet, is that for our major project investments, last year CTP estimated that 70% of those investments were going to benefit carbon reduction efforts, which I think is positive. Those are just the majors. We need to dig a little bit deeper and also be looking at our minors, and then also be assessing, where and what types of communities are benefiting. And so I think we're getting better at that, and the prioritization effort will help us be able to map and analyze the data in a more fine-grained manner. But in general, we are working on this front in a concerted effort and making progress. Next slide. We also need to establish greenhouse gases and VMT targets. That's important for us to set the targets to both hold ourselves to account and celebrate our successes. We are doing that today. The Maryland Transportation Plan is our long-range transportation plan, and it has a goal to reduce our greenhouse gases by 40% by 2031 and reduce our VMT, our vehicle miles traveled per capita, by 20% by 2050. Additionally, there was an FHWA rule that has been halted by the courts, but the rule was going to direct state DOTs to establish targets to reduce on-road tailpipe emissions. We, in our advocacy efforts, joined with peer states, many of those states that Darren's with in Minnesota today, to support the rule. We think it is the right thing for us to be doing, and we ultimately set a goal of reducing our on-road tailpipe emissions by 4% on Maryland's roads, the NHS, the National Highway System, from 22 levels by 2025. We're making good progress on that front. But we will continue to set goals regardless of litigation at the federal level, because ultimately we believe it is the right thing to be doing at this juncture in terms of where we find ourselves. Next slide. this is my last one, and I'll be quick. We need to ultimately implement the carbon reduction strategy. The carbon reduction strategy includes a range of existing strategies aimed at reducing carbon emissions in the transportation system. It ultimately identifies kind of 4 key areas that we see opportunities that are within our control, that we're going to be strategically advancing: transportation technology, reduction of vehicle miles traveled, sustainable design and materials practices in terms of what goes into the actual construction practices, and then how we can reduce congestion on our roadways. One of those opportunities that we have within the bipartisan infrastructure law is another new program called the Carbon Reduction Program. This is a formula program that enables us to make targeted investments within these strategy areas and in partnership with our local jurisdictions to make targeted investments in projects and programs that reduce carbon emissions. We are working to finalize and will with an approval by the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board, BRTB, in the coming weeks, be able to fully approve a slate of 20 local and state projects totaling $33 million on efforts that will achieve carbon reductions, whether it be investments in zero-emission vehicles, chargers, bike and ped facilities, as well as transportation technology, so we can measure the performance of the system. It's an exciting opportunity. We still have another few rounds to go to invest carbon reduction dollars through the bipartisan infrastructure law, so there's more to come on this front as well. This was just the first funding round of a number that we will have before the bill is fully expired in 2026. With that, Chairman, I will rest, but glad to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you to both departments as well as the Chief Sustainability Officer for a lot of information. We do have a number of questions. We'll start with Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my questions go to the Governor's executive order. So, Madam Secretary and Megan, thank you for your presentation on that, and many thanks to the Governor for issuing it. My first question goes to the zero emission standards for heating equipment. I mean, I know it's very early in the process of developing the regulation, but my question is it your intention that with the phase-in that the regulation will have, that eventually these standards would apply to all new heating equipment that's installed in the state, both for residential and commercial buildings?
So I think that question is for me, and thank you for that question. Good to see you. Yes, the standard, the ZEHES, applies to residents, basically, and small buildings, small commercial buildings. We're taking comment on that right now, but it will start with small equipment. As you know, BEPS is basically applying to the larger buildings, but yeah, ZEHES is for small equipment in homes and small commercials.
Okay, thank you. My second question goes to the part of the executive order that calls for MEA to establish a framework for a clean energy standard of 100% clean energy by 2035. And I know, again, we're just a few months from the governor's signing of the executive order, but can you provide any update as to the work that MEA is doing on that?
I think my colleagues at MEA is on here, who I think would be better probably to give you an update on what they're doing. Is MEA on?
I can answer briefly for that, Secretary McElwain. Thank you, Mr. Delegate, for that question, and appreciate all of your leadership over the years on this issue. As you know, in the executive order, MEA was charged with developing a framework for 100% clean energy by 2035 and outlining the steps that would be needed to be taken in Maryland to achieve that goal. I can share that MEA is in the process of completing that study, and we hope to be able to share more updates on that soon.
Okay, Very good. Thank you. And then, Mr. Chairman, my last question is, with respect to all the projects that are initiated by the executive order, Madam Secretary and Megan, is there any additional support that the legislature would need to provide to implement these programs? Or is it the administration's position that you have the authority that you need to take all these actions via administrative action?
Well, I have to tell you, I do appreciate that question that you're asking about, do we need support from the legislator? Right now, we're in the process of looking at all of the different programs and projects and initiatives that we're required to do. But we will certainly give us some time to look over what we're doing, and I'll get back with you in terms of if there's something we can use your help in. I'm sure there is.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Stein, Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Secretary and the officer and MDOT for this great presentation and for the work in this area and making sure that we implement our climate solution policies. I was going to ask the same question as Delegate Stein, but I was going to use it as a shameless plug for a small bill that I'm putting in that addresses leaf blowers, gasoline-powered leaf blowers, but I'll skip that. My question is, a little while ago, a few days ago, Chair Corman and I were given a very comprehensive briefing from members of a common ownership community called Leisure World, which is actually in Delegate Stewart's district. I think Delegate Stewart may have also received a similar briefing on this, about the problems of implementing and meeting the goals in that community for the electrification standards. And I think it goes to, from what I think they presented to us, there are some real hurdles that they have to overcome as a common ownership community. For example, the transmission lines and the electrical power that's coming into the buildings doesn't, support all the in every case the migration to heat pump technology, and there were a number of other issues. And the reason I'm asking, and this is, I guess, directed to the Secretary, is there an effort to try to help some of these homeowners in condominiums and other common ownership communities to tackle some of these special hurdles and challenges that they have with respect to migrating to electrification?
I really do appreciate that. And I am very much familiar with what's going on with Leisure World. We've been working with the homeowners there and having some updates. I will tell you that we do need to be more flexible on our side so that we can implement regulations that are fair and keeping in mind all the issues that we've heard about Leisure World. We in Montgomery County, Montgomery County's Green Bank, we're working closely with that community so that we can look to overcome some of those challenges. And that includes providing technical assistance to them and also connecting them with funding. I will say we're not in the business of leaving no one behind, and that includes Leisure World. The issues that they've brought up is real, and we are looking into it. And we'll make sure that I get back with you and just give you an update of where we are. But it is important that we address those concerns. And by the way, my team did have a listening session there. We got a lot of feedback from them, and we're going to incorporate everything that we heard into all that we do going forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just to follow up on that, Madam Secretary, obviously we all love Leisure World, but there are many other buildings around the state that are impacted by BEPS and, obviously other parts of Montgomery County, Baltimore City, and then, other parts of the state. So I want to make sure they all get the same attention. And to that point, one of the things we heard is that one of the things they're struggling with, as Delegate Foley said, is the increased costs, not of the heat pumps necessarily, but the feeder lines to actually power them. So you cited a study about $1,000 savings based on the clean heat appliances, and I'm curious, does that address any necessary electrical upgrades? For example, we know there are situations where neighborhoods literally can't install more solar panels because the feeder lines can't handle it. I imagine there's a similar situation as you continue to electrify. So does the study you cite account for the need for the electric system upgrades? I'm not saying they can't be done. I'm not saying they can't be handled, but there are a cost to them, depending on your location.
Yeah, we need to continue working with the utilities on many of those challenges. And I have not heard a lot about the feeder line issue, but I will look into that. But yes, you made a good point. It's not just about Leisure World. It's about all of these issues that I'm hearing about, that you're hearing about. We have a long runway for these programs. It's not over yet. It just started. And so, yes, we will make sure that everything that we're hearing, again, we're opening up the lines of communication so that we hear from everyone and that we are addressing those most important and really urgent issues that are being brought to our attention. So I'll look into the feeder line issue and make sure that we're paying attention to that as well.
So Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank everybody for the presentation this morning. I have a question for Joe McAndrew from his presentation. His first slide, the second bullet point was talking about charging stations and charging equipment for different grades of vehicles. And last year I think we had a pretty compelling hearing late in session about the conditions on the shore with charging equipment and not just the shore, but rural Maryland. The lack of charging stations and the frustration by people that were purchasing or thinking about purchasing or had purchased an EV, some of which, turned them back in because of frustration over lack of charging stations. And I know that the percentage of vehicles sold in rural Maryland is extremely low. And I know that some of these issues are part of the big frustration. So what kind of time frame are you talking about, in regards to your second bullet point on your first slide?
Yeah, great question, Delegate, and appreciate the ask. I will ask Darren to provide some articulation on kind of some of the data points here, but firm believer, if you build it, they will come, and if you don't build it, they won't come, right? And this is one of those challenges. We came in, unfortunately, and had limited progress on implementation of the NEVI program. And so we're moving at pace. Those chargers are going to come online, those that were selected to receive funds as early as next spring, and fully online, all of them next fall. We're going to be submitting for another RFP for round 2 of NEVI before the end of this calendar year to ultimately do another round of funds. What we need to do is full build out of what's called the alternative fuel corridor, 23 corridors throughout the state. And for NEVI, there's requirements around uptime and reliability, as well as distance from the center line of the alternative fuel corridor, no more than a mile. And they need to have DC fast charging and a number of ports. That includes trunk lines and main arterials on the Eastern Shore, as well as throughout the entire state of Maryland. But I think, the pace with which we bring these ports online, both ourselves, the public sector, our private sector, and our local partners, is going to be really important. I don't have the stat directly in front of me, so I'm going to hand it off to Darren here in a second. But as of yesterday, we have 4,890 charging ports throughout the state of Maryland. 491 ports have been added in the last 12 months. The majority of those ports are within areas outside of the Eastern Shore, but we have plans for growth there as well. So, but I will hand it off to Darren to maybe get a little bit more technical with some of that answer.
No, thank you for that. Do you have any idea how many are on the shore?
We can follow up with specifics in terms of both, awards within NEVI, gaps that we need to deploy within the Eastern Shore Alternative Fuel Network, as well as county by county specific information on the ports.
Right, because it goes back to my original comment of the frustration due to a lack of that equipment, and I know that the Roll Maryland's in dismal as far as the percentage of purchases of EV. So
yep,
all this ties together, and I'm going to wrap this up with a nice little bow and say that this feeder line issue is a huge issue on the shore as well, and I think that's ties to some of your problems with that, as well as problems with areas that want to do solar that can't. We're having to deal in areas where there is feeder lines that really the public is very concerned about taking out productive farmland where there is feeder lines, and there's a lot of areas that want to do things that can't do it because of this lack of feeder lines. So this feeder line issue is big on the shore, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Can I just, oh,
I was going to say, Delegate, and then Secretary, if you want to jump in, Delegate, we'll follow up with an email with more detailed information in terms of where we're at and progress that we're making.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I just wanted to add that I hear you again regarding the feeder lines. We do have alternative compliance in BEPS, and there are some cases where some of the projects are too expensive, or there are issues with getting things in order. And so we're aware of that. And that's why we continue to look at BEPS to make sure that, we're building in, we have those flexibilities available. So it's something I'm thinking about, and thank you for bringing it up.
Let's turn to the delegate from Leisure World, Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I would be remiss if I did not start off by thanking the chairman and also Delegate Foley for going down to Leisure World and visiting and for raising that issue. And of course, thanks also to you, Madam Secretary, for keeping that front of mind about all of the residents and common ownership communities across Montgomery County, across the state, who I think have raised some real concerns with BEPS. I also actually would be remiss if I didn't note that Mr. McAndrew visited Leisure World. We were on a transportation related panel together a couple months ago. So he's also made the excursion down there. My first question is related to a separate issue, which is our RPS. And so, Madam Secretary, I know that there have been a number of reports that have come out from MDE. I can't even keep track of all of the ones that have mentioned and recommended and suggested in a variety of different ways that one opportunity to meet our climate goals is to remove trash incineration from Tier 1 of the RPS. So I was just wondering if, now that it appears that the Senate President is going to support legislation and the upcoming legislation to do exactly that, if the administration has made a decision to come out to affirmatively support legislation to do something that I think the agency has been recommending for at least the last couple of years.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up and mentioning that. We are continuing to evaluate those proposals, and we're going to be working with MEA and the governor's office as well on those issues. So I don't have a complete answer for you right now, but that is something that we're looking into.
Okay, I got more of a softball. We're going to work
with the Senate President as well. So yes, I will follow up on this.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm hopeful that maybe this is finally the session we can kind of all the different branches and respective chambers and stakeholders can sort of come together on that issue. I think it's long overdue, but I've got an easier question for you, which is, could you talk a little bit about how the administration plans to balance our climate goals on the one hand with the possible economic development opportunities from the data center industry?
I can actually answer that one,
Okay.
Delegate Stewart.
Thanks, Ms. Conklin. Yeah, sorry.
To note, I'm a proud Montgomery resident as well, although I'm a constituent of Chairman Corman, but appreciate
It's okay. He's pretty good too.
About Leisure World. I would also just note, I'm glad you brought up trash incineration in the RPS. While we're still evaluating that issue, I will point out that MD's climate pollution reduction plan does have a number of legislative proposals in it, which does include removing trash incineration from the RPS, and appreciate you raising that issue. But I want to talk next about data centers. Data centers are definitely a key component of internet and data infrastructure, and our modern technology-based economy cannot function without them. However, we do know that data center growth in the state also poses several important challenges. For example, large data centers consume a significant amount of electricity, putting stress on our energy infrastructure. Furthermore, data centers use a large quantity of water for cooling purposes. Their backup generators can contribute to air pollution, and poorly sited data centers could impact the state's open space goals. Most importantly, I want to share, Governor Moore does not believe that economic growth and environmental protection are mutually exclusive. The administration has spent much of this year actively engaging with stakeholders to gather their input on the future of Maryland's data center policy. Our administration believes that it is important to establish a robust and forward-looking state policy on data centers, and we're looking forward to continuing to work in partnership with stakeholders such as all of you to achieve that goal. So thanks for that question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've got one more, Mr. Chairman, if I could direct it over to my buddy, Mr. McAndrew. So I know that I think I remember back in 2021, it was sort of announced with a fair amount of fanfare about transitioning the state's bus fleet, which I think is about 800 strong, into electric. And I know that there was a pilot program, I think in 2023, that transitioned sort of like 6 or 7 of the 800 to electric. And I just wanted to know what the progress of that was, because I think I remember the goal was by 2028 or 2030 to have the entire fleet transition. Have we done any better than 6 or 7, or are we still stuck at 6 or 7 out of 800?
Yeah, so we just took it's a multi-pronged story. So I'll tell you our successes and then our headwinds. We recently received approval from BPW to do a bus purchase for next calendar year that includes 20 battery electric buses and roughly 50 hybrid buses. And we plan to bring another bus purchase to BPW before the end of the year for calendar year 26. At that juncture, we're going to be bumping up against kind of the infrastructure capacity of MTA's current ability to charge the fleet. And generally, both the buses cost about 2x a normal clean diesel bus, but also a retrofit and or a full rebuild of a bus depot is warranted. And that unfortunately, with our fiscal challenges that we're facing right now, it is hard for us to continue down the path at pace of a rapid transition towards the zero emission bus. We believe that a bus full of people, regardless of the fuel source, is probably the most important thing, especially in terms of the communities that we're serving. So we're going to, without additional revenues or a path forward there, going to be transitioning to clean diesel and an indefinite pause. It's not a full-on deferral until we can advance the pace there. I will acknowledge I'm also the Secretary's designee to the WMATA board, and this Thursday at our board meeting, we will be discussing a similar subject. And there's a couple things within the board materials there that I think are relevant for both parties. One, it costs more for a zero emission bus, and WMATA is getting to the same point right now where their capital budget is limiting their ability to transition. Two, the market isn't there in terms of the number of bus providers that are federally compliant that can deliver zero emission buses at scale. So demand is far outstripping supply, and so cost is up, as well as delivery schedule is delayed. And so WMATA is planning to likely slow their transition rate as well. But to your initial question, yes, we continue the pace of transition, but we're going to be bumping up against a period where we're going to have to slow the transition as we look to articulate a new path forward there.
So just to make it more simply for all the listeners at home, we're not going to transition to EV buses anymore anytime soon unless you guys get more money from the legislature for it. Is that right?
I mean, I think it's a question of it is one way to look at it, but I think another way to look at it is we are going to prioritize making sure that we have the buses readily available, that the market can deliver on time, and that our customers can rely on a reliable trip from point A to point B.
Okay, appreciate.
Thank you. I would just note there's no pause being offered to people on cars under California Clean Cars 2 or people buying trucks under Advanced Clean Trucks. So I would just keep that in mind for the department. Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for everyone who's participating in this today. Very informative. I have a couple questions. First of all, I really appreciate the all of government approach in the executive order. I would like to focus on one aspect of that so that this group does not get left behind, and that is for folks who live in older homes or are aging in place, and the transition to electric may be very costly. Even if they get it back on the investment, the upfront costs for senior citizens who've been living in their homes for a long time and are living in older homes where they don't have the ability to even get any kind of, they've got radiator heat. They don't have the kind of heat system that they'd have to have their whole heating system changed over. That would be extremely cost prohibitive. So my question is, when you're coordinating all the agencies, what is the role of is it the Department of Aging, or is there some other group that's looking out for the seniors who want to age in place in their homes now?
Well, thanks for that question, Delegate. Sorry, Secretary McElwain. I'll answer quickly and then turn to you. That's a really great question. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the rebates that are going to be available under the Biden-Harris administration. When I worked for Senator Van Hollen, I actually worked on a section of the Inflation Reduction Act called Home Energy Rebates. And MEA is in the process of submitting their application for this plan. So this will be $137 million that will be available to Marylanders for two different programs. One focuses on home appliances and electrifying appliances, but the other also focus on whole home energy rebates. They're called HOMES rebates. Those rebates will start being available to Marylanders next year, precisely for some of the things that you're discussing here, making that transition more affordable to homeowners, particularly those who are living in older homes, and particularly those residents of Maryland who are low to moderate income. And I'll yield now to Secretary McElwain if you have any additional comments there.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to highlight that my agency, we have been working very closely with the Department of Aging, which spurred really out of this EO. So yes, we have to make sure that all of the policies that we have, that they are unique for all of the unique populations and unique needs of everyone. And so yes, in particular in your case regarding older citizens, we absolutely are taking that into consideration and working very closely with aging.
Thank you so much. My other question, I'd like to transition to Joe. I really appreciate all that you're talking about with all of it, but for the purpose of reducing emissions in the transportation system, one of the things that you haven't mentioned, and I know you know what I'm going for, is the increase of sidewalks and bike paths along state roads, and partnerships with local governments. I mean, we have an all government, but is it all state government? Where are the partnerships with the local governments to make this really flow all the way through the system?
Go ahead.
There you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Joe, just quickly, and I'll turn it over to you. You probably have more to contribute than I do. But we just had a meeting with the Smart Cabinet. And one of the things I mentioned just last week was when we're thinking about land decisions, we need to really think about climate change. And that means we need to think about when we're planning these communities and doing all of the smart growth, we need to make sure that sidewalks, bikes, all of those things are a part of the entire package. More importantly, everything needs to fall back to what are we doing as it relates to climate change? So that was something that I brought up. Over to you, Joe.
Great partner. Couldn't agree more. Delegate, we appreciate your urgency and focus on this matter. I think as an individual who rides a bicycle on a regular basis, I too hold your interests, as does.
Mr. Frozen?
Am I frozen?
Not anymore.
Okay. Sorry. And if I freeze fully, I might just go off of camera. So a number of things we are doing. The Secretary signed a new complete streets policy last summer. That's really important to make sure as we think about anything from resurfacing to redesigning to retrofitting to complete overhaul of a roadway facility, we're building and planning for and designing for all potential users of that facility: bicyclists, pedestrians, young and old, as well as drivers. And I think that that's really important. That policy takes effect January 1, 2025, and we're working together with our modes to establish policies to implement. But we're also working with our local partners to learn from. Some of them have been doing complete streets far longer than we have at a higher rate and maybe a little bit more enhanced than we have. But we're also making sure that everybody understands how we're trying to go about it. So last Friday, actually Friday morning, at the Secretary's office, we hosted a complete streets training and educational opportunity for our local partners, where tens of local partners came together with us, and it was a half-day training. So again, learning from, but partnering with. We also, to be able to maintain our facilities, we need to know where they are and the condition that they're in. And MDOT actually is a leader in this, as wild as this sounds. We are rounding out an inventory of the sidewalks along our SHA facilities. This will be the first inventory of sidewalks along any state DOT's facility in the country. So again, sad that we are the leader, but we will be the leader once implemented. Once we have that baseline, we then can better understand what the conditions are and understand kind of what the cost may be and understand, what the opportunities look like from a maintenance perspective. I think for us, none of this happens without strong partners and collaboration with, because as we build a sidewalk, ideally, we're building it to meet the needs and the wants of the community. So maintenance administrator extensively about it, as the Secretary. We want to continue to work with you on this subject matter as we move towards session.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's turn to the birthday girl, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary McElwain, Assistant Secretary McAndrew, and Madam Conklin for all your work and for being here. One thing that I have not really seen addressed much in terms of a climate perspective is plastic. And plastic is a big contributor to climate change because it is derived from fossil fuels. And at all levels of, from extraction to disposal. And an April 2024 report from Berkeley Lab Energy Analysis and Environmental Impacts Division found that by 2050, plastic production could account for 21 to 31%, depending on the growth rate of the remaining carbon budget for limiting global warming to under 1.5 degrees C. I didn't see anything in the executive order about plastic. I don't remember, but I don't think there was anything in the pathways about it, other than I know incineration is one small piece of that. But in light of and I know MDE deals with plastics from a solid waste perspective and a recycling perspective, but when you look at it from a climate perspective, there's maybe a little different emphasis. And I just wondered, is that something that you're considering in terms of moving forward and reducing carbon emissions?
I'm assuming you're asking me that question.
Yes, Madam Secretary.
Okay, good. Yes, we do understand the circular economy and repurposing materials to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is really important. It's at the top of what we do as well. We're looking at multiple different recycling programs for the state. that can be addressed using or going through the legislator. And we really do look forward to partnering with you and your colleagues in the future, because I agree that this is a very important area that we need to make sure we do not miss.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that. And I also meant to say that I really am excited about the whole of government approach. I think that's really the way we have to do that. But just in terms of thinking about it, recycling is important, but we also have to look at the whole life cycle as well when we're looking at it from a climate perspective.
That's absolutely correct.
So thank you so much. May I ask a question to Assistant Secretary McAndrew? Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the so first of all, I'm excited about the renewed emphasis on prioritization from these perspectives, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the new prioritization process. I was glad to see reducing vehicle miles traveled as a part of the emphasis. And I just wondered if you can give some more detail or more information about what types of things you're looking at to reduce vehicle miles traveled, especially considering the fiscal headwinds that we're dealing with.
Yeah, good question. And Delegate, good to see you. Appreciate spending a few hours with you yesterday at the Baltimore County CTP tour meeting. We appreciate the commitment to prioritization that was shown by the General Assembly with Chapter 30 a few years back. What we're really looking to try to do is take it and fully realize the wants of prioritizing all of our investments dollar by dollar in the expansion space against the values that we hold dear as a state. Those values, like I said, include equity, include climate and emissions reductions. It includes congestion reductions. It includes land use and economic development considerations. What we would say is that the investment or the decisions with which and how we would do it is folks would still submit projects to be considered in the same similar yet more transparent process than we currently use. To enter into the D&E pipeline, as well as those that are ready to move into the construction program. They would be evaluated on their ability to achieve those values. Qualitative. There are some in Chapter 30, while we agree with the intent and thrust of the measures that are included, you get a mix of qualitative and you get a mix of quantitative. And when you have a different kind of approach, it's tough to measure, how you get a score at the end of it, right? How something would stack up maybe as close as one or best one can in an apples to apples comparison. And so we're looking to try to move it all to a qualitative approach around things like access to jobs within a certain period of time, access to jobs within a certain period of time for, you say, underserved populations. We would measure and we would publicly report out on the project's ability to achieve the goals through a prioritization process that would then inform the actual investments that we're able to make. And able to make is important, right? If you don't have money or you don't have funding available, it's hard to prioritize, say, for growth and expansion. When you don't have those funds, you're really trying to focus in on maintaining what you have, that system preservation, that state of good repair, and maybe not being able to take on all of those very large infrastructure investments on the expansion side that folks would like to take on. So that's kind of where we're at. We're moving through the process right now of briefing folks, and I think we'd be glad to brief the committee or delegate. We'd be glad to have a one-on-one with you as well to inform kind of the process and the discussion. We're taking feedback right now as we look towards heading to next session.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get too much into the weeds on that. Okay. In this, I was really more interested in the vehicle miles traveled and how you intend to address that, or if you can give some more specific information about how we can reduce that.
Yeah, so I think that on a project by project basis, we will be measuring an ability for a project to reduce greenhouse gases, right? And so that is, and these are expansion projects. And that will be one of a few factors that we will be assessing within that prioritization scheme. Within Delegate Edelson's alternative approach for the climate assessment proposal, we're looking at kind of an all of consolidated transportation program look on whether or not we are achieving the goals that are set out in the Climate Solutions Now Act. And if we aren't, looking at the investments that we're making, whether it be reassessing certain projects moving forward, adding in projects that would mitigate and help balance the portfolio. But I think that the way we're looking at it right now is trying to make sure that both of these can speak to each other. One is assessing on a project by project basis, and one is assessing the total climate and VMT impacts across the entire portfolio of projects.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, sorry about that.
Okay, we have 2 more questions for this panel. Delegate Teresa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question again is for Assistant Secretary McAndrew. Sorry, we're all picking on you this morning. I want to go to the back to the EV charging and sort of building out that infrastructure. As you probably know, I've had a bill quite a few years in a row to require it in all new construction, require EV charging to be available at home in all new construction. You probably know that some 80% of EV charging is done in the home. And so I was very interested sort of in the conversation, both about the common ownership communities and the Eastern Shore in terms of us like really thinking about doing this during new construction. And I guess my question is, what role do you see? Because I know a lot of it's about money, it's about what we can fund, but what role do you see for builders in new construction playing in expanding that network to where people live and work?
So I might ask Darren to jump in a little bit here, but I'd say, if it is touching a federal dollar, we have to make sure it complies with federal standards. And so in terms of new construction for housing or publicly accessible charging networks is really important, as well as location for where. So for example, NEVI, I kind of articulated some of the criteria previously. It's got to be within a set distance from the center line of an alternative fuel corridor. It's got to be publicly accessible. It can't be behind a gate. It's got to be publicly accessible to all residents of the state. It's got to have a standard for uptime in terms of reliability at 97% of the time. And it's also got to be willing to report out and have that information publicly accessible. So in terms of how we partner with public and private partners, if it's through dollars through that program, those are some of the considerations. If a developer kind of was within that sweet spot of location and willingness to partner, they could certainly apply for funds through the NEVI RFP funding rounds that we're going to be releasing here shortly.
Sorry, just to clarify, I do appreciate that those dollars are limited and how you could partner. I may have misstated the question. My question is more about what role do you see in sort of a requirement for EV charging to be in all new development? Because that is not something that we need to have federal dollars necessarily to do, or you as a department need to fund. It's a matter of making a requirement so that infrastructure is really built out where 80% of people, more than 80% of people, if you also do office construction, because we know 80%, as I said, charge at home. So I guess my question is more what role do you see in a requirement rather than continuing to tap into the same dollars and the related requirements?
Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Darren in a second. He's the chair of the ZVIC committee, which brings together all of our state agencies that participate in this. As a citizen who drives a plug-in hybrid, who charges at my house, I see an immense benefit. I think just it is a little bit outside of MDOT's remit to be charging or requiring it on the development side. But that said, Darren does convene our peer agencies throughout the state. So maybe I will hand it off to him if there's additional context there.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So, first of all, as Joe said, this is outside of MDOT's remit in terms of requirements, and retrofitting existing structures and properties to provide charging is theoretically more difficult than having it be a requirement for new construction. So I will say that, and this is something that's in addition to some of the funding sources that Joe mentioned, that are tools in our toolbox, the carbon reduction program, the NEVI program, competitive programs that we compete for at the federal level. We work with partners, including local jurisdictions and the Maryland Clean Energy Center and the Maryland Energy Administration, to deploy investments also to provide for charging at structures, including multifamily units, which are particularly difficult to address. So, that's, I apologize, that's not taking a position on what you mentioned. And in theory, though, it's new construction. It's usually easier. I think we found this with building design standards to apply something to what's new as opposed to retrofitting.
Right, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I just quick follow up, if you guys are not the right department, and this climate, the governor's climate, sorry, I'm forgetting the name right this second, climate group is not the right department, who would be considering that? And is it the housing department? Is the housing department part of these discussions?
Delegate Ross, we have a great representative from the governor's office here. I bet she could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I will look into this more for you in the particulars of that bill, but my understanding is that this would be under the jurisdiction of MEA and that they did support your bill last session, but I'm going to double check on that and I'll be happy to follow up with you individually. Thanks for raising this issue with me.
Great, thank you.
Great. The last question for this panel, Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Us guys in Southern Maryland still do read the newspaper occasionally, and I noticed that Montgomery County was just sued by business interests for saying that they couldn't build any new gas buildings essentially in Montgomery County. So does MDE, and I think they also thought that it was preempted by federal law. So does MDE believe there's a litigation issue out there relative to clean heat standard and zero emissions hearings? And if so, how are you going to address it?
We have a two-part question. You're asking if there's any ongoing litigation from US EPA. Is that one of your questions?
My first question was Montgomery County said no new gas buildings, I believe. And they say that was preempted, and the businesses are pushing back saying it's preempted by federal law that they can build gas buildings. So do you believe there's a litigation risk in Maryland for this business? Do you believe the business interests have a valid case saying that what has been proposed is preempted by federal law?
I don't actually want to comment on what their legal case is, but I do want to answer your question and try and get to what you're really asking me. I'll say this to you. All of our regulations at MDE, they have to be approved by the Office of our Attorney General before we can propose them. So we do have a process that we go through. And then after that, they're reviewed for legal sufficiency by the legislator, the AELR committee, as you probably know. So we do, again, we do have authority. We have authority if we need to implement regulations, we can do that. But we do carefully make sure that when we are doing it, we have the legal authority. What's going on in Montgomery County, I am not aware of. I have not heard of this lawsuit that they're engaged in right now. So I can't really speak to what authority did they have and did they use the authority based on something that's coming down from US EPA. I don't know that, but I will look into it for you.
Okay, thank you. It's a curiosity question because it affects Montgomery County, it affects the whole state at the end of the day. So I have a second question, which is sort of an economical one. And it's a supply demand question. As Maryland continues to move towards electric and phases out fossil fuels, the demand for electricity continues to grow. Yet the supply, with the fossil fuels being cut out and what we're going to get out of solar or wind at the end of the day, seems to be disproportional. So my question is, will the state look stronger towards nuclear? Because we're going to be importing anyway. So somehow that balance has got to get there. Going to back what Delegate Stewart said and what Delegate Trauster was saying is demand is going up, supply is limited. So how are you going to come to an equilibrium in there that supply will equal demand on a cost-efficient basis using clean energy?
That is a very good question, and it is a challenge that we are working through. We do want to phase out eventually over time. As you know, phasing out fossil fuel is not going to happen anytime soon. And you are correct that the clean energy that we have is not sufficient to really transition us, not today, not right away. We only have about 2.9% of solar usage in Maryland. We have 1.3% in wind. That is not enough for a transition. We do have about 40% in nuclear. And so we do understand we have a long way to go. And we are trying to figure out ways now. As you know, the governor has a 100% clean energy goal. So all of these things that you're asking is so important for us to really think about, how do we make this transition? We're not just stopping right now and cutting off everyone's light right now. We're not doing that. We're waiting. We're strategizing. We have a lot of assessments going on, and we're trying to figure out, how do we plan in a way that's reliable and affordable for all and sustainable? Because your question is about sustainability as well. And so, yes, that's important. Valid questions.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Morgan. Thank you to the Department of Transportation and the Chief Sustainability Officer for being here. We are going to stick with the Department of the Environment. Secretary McElwain, if you want to move on to sort of panel 2, the sort of sundry updates of all the important work you all are doing.
Thank you so much. Well, we're talking a lot about climate change programs today. And you all hear me say it all the time that Maryland is leading. And honestly, it's because we really are. And so anytime I can take a moment to brag a bit, I do that. So I'm going to just take 30 seconds just to really emphasize how we are leading in a lot of ways. So for example, the latest nationwide data from EPA, according to the nationwide data issued from EPA, we reduced our greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland by 35.8% in 17 years. And that is greater than any reduction in any state. So I also want to point out that in early or to the mid 2000s, we actually had in Maryland the worst air quality east of the Mississippi. And we know that Baltimore, they had the worst air quality at that time as well. But historically, we made it, we did it. And it was really because of all the extraordinary progress that we're making and how we're focusing on pollution reduction. And then before 2022, we had never met our national air quality standards in Maryland ever. And we did in 2022. And we would still be meeting those standards had it not been for the wildfires in Canada. So, of course, we all know those wildfires really was a combination of issues mainly directed at climate change, which is another reason and reminder of why the work that we're doing is so very important. So BEPS, we're continuing our work towards BEPS, as you all know. We're trying to get in place the new building energy performance standards. They're required under the Climate Solutions Now Act. As you recall, this program will drive large buildings, and those are buildings that are over 35,000 square feet. So those buildings will start shifting to zero carbon building systems and obviously become more efficient. So since the end of last session, we have been following a new timeline to make sure that we're able to comply with the regulation requirements that are in this year's budget. We continued our outreach, and we have been consulting with the building owners so that they can prepare and be prepared for the BEPS program. And just another reminder, we did have to remove the energy efficiency targets for now. So the BEPS proposal was out for comment through October 10th. We did receive a lot of constructive feedback, and we are working on the final package now, hoping to publish it at the end of the year so we can start the 2025 energy benchmarking process. So once we have that data from the benchmarking, the benchmarking process, we should have that data in 2026. We can start the analysis that was requested by the legislator, and then we can update the BEPS regulation to reflect that data, including incorporating those energy efficiency standards that are, again, required under law. So I want to talk a little about the advanced clean trucks. As we know, it's a multi-state standard for deploying zero emission and medium and heavy duty vehicles on the roadways in a few years. And this is one of those really important regulations because it addresses one of our really big problems in Maryland, and that is pollution from diesel. So as we are required in the 2023 Clean Truck Act, we adopted the regulation last December, and it takes effect starting in model year 2027. We amended the regulation this year to give more early action credit for industry so that they can prepare, years before the regulation even takes effect. And I'm very happy to say this, the transition in Maryland, believe it or not, it has already started. And we're starting to see early adoption now. For example, Amazon, they have already started electrifying their fleet of delivery vans. And we have examples from Volvo as well. So I'm starting to see, and I think a lot of us are starting to see the momentum and, we're starting to see that transition take place. I also want to give just a quick update on the needs assessment and deployment plan, because I know that's important. A lot of people are waiting on it. So we were unable to start it in 2023 because we did not have allocated, or we did not have any funding available at that time. But earlier this year, the legislator approved, thank you, funding so that we were able to actually announce that contract bid over the summer. And now the procurement process is just about complete. And once it's approved by the Board of Public Works later this year, we can go ahead and get started. But I will say, although the assessment took a little long to get started and it will be completed in the fall, we are planning to provide really good high-level preliminary data or a report to any interested parties who would like to get that information by January, hopefully by January 1st. Okay, regarding the Maryland Commission on Climate Change and the working groups, which, yes, I do chair. And I am very happy to report that those four work groups, they were established. And of course, they were established under this Climate Solutions Now Act. They are now established. We have funding for those work groups. We have positions that we receive. Really appreciate that. And just as a reminder, the scope of the commission was expanded by adding those four work groups so that they could determine how to manage the transition to a clean economy that we've been talking about today. So we do expect those working groups to provide final reports to the commission by the end of the year, and one of them will be providing their report sometime in the spring. So regarding the extended producer responsibility legislation, me personally, I was really happy to see it pass. If you recall, when the bill was in the conference committee, They struck out the requirement that the needs assessment would be paid by producers. So because of this, we were not able to get started on that right away either, because we had to figure out a way to find funding so that we could pay a third party to conduct the assessment. But we are back on track, and part of the needs assessment should be completed by this month, with other parts of it being delivered throughout the end of this year. We do expect recommendations to be finalized before the legislative session. And regarding the EPR Advisory Council, we have met 4 times, and we have been using, or that council have been using, the previous Senate version of the 2023 EPR bill as their baseline for developing the future of the EPR legislation. And I will say, it's from the feedback that I'm getting, it has been really great having that representation from industry and the environmental groups. And they've been really, really productive. Now on to Paint Stewardship Program. The company Paint Care will be responsible for getting our program up and running in Maryland. They have been very engaged. They've been helping us to understand how our laws and regulations can aid successful implementation of the program. I really do not have any concern or worry that we will have the program implemented on time by early calendar year 2026 is what we're shooting for, and that's the required time. And I really do think that Maryland residents will be so happy to have this program. So this table that you see is about pollution, the pollution early detection system. So the table is really a monthly snapshot of what my team looks at as part of the early detection system. This system allows our team to regularly review the nutrient levels for all of the 75 large wastewater plants. These numbers show that if you look at the table, we tried not to make it so complicated. So if you look at the table, you could see that 15 facilities could be in non-compliance by the end of the year. And once we see a trend like this, we start engaging with facilities right away so that we can get ahead of the problem and start reversing that trend. So in regards to the study on well and septic permitting, we were directed to evaluate the delegation of authority for well and septic systems. That study is due December 1st, 2024, and it will assess the current program's effectiveness. It's going to compare what we're doing to other states and propose a structure to improve customer service. And I will say again, that report is on schedule. I have no reason to think we will be behind. The document is in review, and again, I'm happy to report also that we have held many stakeholder meetings with representatives from the building, the real estate and health sectors, so that we could talk about broadly, all the benefits and challenges too of the current system. We have also engaged the newly formed Maryland Board of On-Site Wastewater Professionals so that we can get their feedback on the current program as well. We have a few recommendations that we are looking at internally now. Some of those recommendations are looking at standardizing permit applications and turnaround times. Also, we're looking at a recommendation regarding developing online permitting systems and conducting more routine reviews. So that's where we are with that. And regarding mold standards, in 2023, we were directed to staff a work group on mold standards and remediation. In this work group, there were diverse representation, I'm happy to say, from industry, environmental groups, agencies, local government, and housing associations too. So we submitted to the Maryland General Assembly a report earlier this year, and it does include 4 recommendations to address mold in buildings. The recommendations mainly focus on really the need to educate. It talks about communication and reinforcing the building codes and looking very closely at mold remediation licensing. So that's it for me and my updates, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for covering all that ground. We have a question from Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, it's great that you have established the pollution early detection system for the majors. Just wanted to ask if Back River wastewater treatment plant or Patapsco plant are among the ones that could potentially be in non-compliance by the end of the year.
No, Back River and Patapsco, they are performing very well. I could not say that when I first started, as you know, in my first hearing. But today they are really performing well. There is no issue. Well, there were a few issues with Patapsco earlier in the year, but we work really closely with the city and they've corrected that.
Great, thank you.
Delegate Tarasa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the mold report, I actually have two questions, just one on the mold report and one on something else, but and I apologize, I haven't read over the report yet. Did that make recommendations for standards? Because I thought that was a lot of the discussion that led to the work group. And then the second question has to do with something else, which is just, did you say we've removed the energy efficiency standard from BEPS? And could you just say a little bit more about why that is?
Yes, we were required to remove the energy standards, energy use standards from BEPS last session, but just temporarily. We just needed to do an assessment, a study, which we're going to be doing that now, and then after that we can entertain it again in 2027, I believe.
And then on the mold report, got liquid standards.
I actually don't have the answer to that in terms of the standards. Were standards in the report? I don't recall that. So let me get back with you.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions? Okay, I think our third panel from the Attorney General Office was not prepared for the level of questioning we would have and the amount of time we would take. So I think they asked to reschedule because of a scheduling conflict. Kristen, correct me if that's incorrect.
You are correct.
Okay, so
Thanks.
great. We are covered a lot of ground, so just want to thank the Department of Environment, again, thank the Chief Sustainability Officer and the Department of Transportation and colleagues. We will work on rescheduling with the Attorney General, but I hope everyone has a great rest of your Tuesday. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.